Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to give folks a few minutes to log into the meeting. All right, I see we're at a study 453, so I'll go ahead and get us started. Welcome everyone to this informational workshop on funding, policies, and project updates from the Southern California Association of Governments, or SCAG. My name is Elizabeth Carvajal, and I manage SCAG's Housing and Economic Empowerment Department, including the REAP program. I want to take a moment to first thank SCAM for this partnership opportunity to have this venue to share all of these exciting project updates with all of you today. At SCAG, our housing crisis is a critical issue that we are certainly working towards addressing, and we really look to broadly examine our housing program to respond to these needs. So today, we're really excited to share some project updates with all of you today, including the status of our housing elements in our region. We're going to share some updates on our housing tools and our REAP 2.0 program, as well as opportunities for public agencies and stakeholders to support housing production in our region. With that, I'll pass it on to David Kiyobe, a regional planner at SCAG, who will be providing some more updates and moderating the conversation today. Thank you, David.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Welcome, everyone. Like Elizabeth said, my name is David Kiyobe, and I'm a planner with SCAG's Housing and Economic Empowerment team. I'm just going to walk through a couple of updates that we have today, as well as introduce a couple of presentations. So next slide, please. So a couple of housing elements updates. If Marani, could you move on to the next slide so I could go over them? So as of November 15th, we have 79 housing elements that were in compliance and 69 that were out of compliance. So just over 50%, but getting there. These numbers keep increasing every couple of weeks. Next slide. And here we just have a list of our fully compliant jurisdictions in the region. So Los Angeles County has the highest number with 35, followed by Orange County, and then Riverside, San Bernardino, Imperial, and Ventura. Next slide, please. And here we have jurisdictions that have adopted housing elements but are not yet compliant. Some of these are in review. All this means is that potentially some of these housing elements are compliant, but HED hasn't yet reviewed them. So this number will obviously change the next few weeks. Next slide, please. And then here we have a list of jurisdictions that we know are currently in review, and hopefully these will be reviewed soon. So our overall numbers of compliant housing elements will increase as the weeks go by. And just a reminder that, the importance of having an HCD certified housing element brings with it eligibility for numerous state and regional wide funding, such as PLHA, affordable housing, community grants, SB1 planning grants, and various infill infrastructure grants. So it is really important that we do have some compliant housing elements. So, our jurisdictions can apply for these grants and really help accelerate housing production in the next couple of years. Next slide, please. So now we have a presentation from Nasha Lalani on development streamlining efforts. This is a SCAG project that we've been working on. So over to you, Nasha.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. As David mentioned, my name is Nasha, and I'm an associate planner in the Housing Economic Empowerment Department. And I'm excited to share with you an update on our development streamlining project, which is funded through REAP. And I will be sharing an overview and kind of our progress to date. So next slide, please. So the project overview, and Myroni, you can keep moving. What is the project? I think Elizabeth already acknowledged in her opening remarks why we are having this project. There is a housing crisis. That's no surprise. We have a shortage of affordable housing supply in our region, even with the presence of a lot of streamlining and exemption tools that can really help expedite and accelerate housing development. So the purpose of this project is really to prepare user-friendly guidance materials, as well as host host facilitated workshops that support not only local jurisdictions or local agencies, but also, developers and other land use professionals, individuals that are working in nonprofit and other advocacy groups to really identify appropriate streamlining tools and better understand state laws that help expedite reviews for housing projects. So the intent really here is to help a diverse set of stakeholders so that when they receive or they're thinking about developing housing projects, they have tools and information available to them on how they can streamline and really push through these projects at a faster pace. Next slide. So I'll give you a brief overview of the progress that we've made on this project to date. So this project was kicked off in fall of 2021. And to start it off in January of this year, we circulated a survey to a range of stakeholders, and I'll briefly discuss the outcomes of that on the following slide. But the survey was really a 10-minute questionnaire that included a range of general demographic information and requested respondents to share their familiarity with existing CEQA streamlining and exemption tools, as well as knowledge of state laws. And we also asked them to kind of share, their background, kind of what they've worked in this space, particularly around demographics, if they were planning staff, at a jurisdiction, how big their city was, and kind of what current tools they had available to them and knowledge for streamlining. So we tried to ask, a range of questions to really garner feedback, which I will discuss on the next slide. These were our survey results. We had a great response. We had about 163 respondents. And as you can see, it was really a diversified range of stakeholders that participated. So while we did hear, predominantly from city planning or planning director level staff, we also heard from elected officials, community members, consultants, developers, and a range of sort of respondents. The majority of the respondents were generally familiar with the available streamlining tools, but as you can see here, over half of the respondents suggested that their respective jurisdiction, didn't have the programs and processes in place to really implement these tools, mainly due to lack of staff time or just general understanding of how to apply the available options. And respondents also indicated that additional support, such as educational materials, would be significantly helpful in reviewing projects. So as you will see in the next slide, in response to the survey results, we have been working with a consultant team to prepare a series of guidance materials. And in addition to providing, general information on state laws, exemptions, streamlining options, the materials also include implementable tools such as checklists and worksheets. These guidance materials, and it's a series of 14 PDFs that we've developed, were just published, I'm happy to share, last week, and they are available on SCAG's website. And on the following slides, I'll give you a brief sort of preview of kind of what those materials look like. So if you log into our, streamlining sort of SCAG webpage, you will see a drop down to access these 14 PDFs. And it's really a range of items that we've provided, again, in response to the feedback we received on the survey. So some focus more generally on available streamlining and exemption options, and others focus on, state laws that have come about recently or can provide some direction to the various jurisdictions or individuals that want to utilize it on how they can properly implement these tools. What I will do on the next slide very quickly is I've just selected one of those PDFs, and I will request Mairani to click on CEQA categorical exemptions hyperlink, and that'll show you an overview of what our guidance material PDFs look like. Perfect. Thank you, Mairani. So as you'll see, it's very comprehensive. This is just one example, and the document, provides an introduction, a background. In this case, it provides a brief summary of the type of categorical exemptions. And then if you scroll towards the bottom of the package here, and this is again just one of 14, you'll see that we have a series of worksheets, and the intent behind providing these tables and worksheets was really to provide a tangible tool to jurisdictions or whoever may be utilizing and reviewing these templates to really have a checklist and say, well, does my project really qualify for this exemption or this range of exemptions? So you can here, easily select yes, no, and kind of think through as you are looking at different types of housing projects. I will caveat, the guidance materials here just to say that these are intended for informational purposes, and we are deferring to the various agencies or jurisdictions that choose to review and use them to really assess their applicability for their particular jurisdiction or the particular housing projects that they're receiving. We are by no means, providing any direct legal advice or guidance. It's meant to be for informational usage and hopefully to be a translatable, quickly implementable tool that individuals can use when they are looking at their housing projects. And I will go quickly back to my presentation to share some next steps. So as I mentioned, we did just publish these guidance materials, so we welcome you to please review them and take the time to see kind of what we have available. But in terms of upcoming next steps, if you go to the next slide, we are hoping to host a series of virtual workshops in spring of 2023. The dates and details will follow, and we will post them on our website as soon as it's available. We do also plan to supplement these workshops with office hour sessions. So if jurisdictions or various stakeholders have a need for more individualized support, we are working with our consultant teams to see if we can offer that option. In the meantime, if you have any further questions, or you're interested in, particular topics that we've published about, please do feel free to reach out to me. You can see my contact information here on the screen. And you can also go directly to our website to get updates. And with that, I will hand it back to David or see if Myrani, there are any questions in the chat. I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Nasha. So if there are any questions, please pop them in the chat or feel free to raise your hand.
We do have one question in the chat, and I think you touched on it, but they asked, how will the tools be developed?
So the tools themselves, I think if you're referring to the guidance materials, the way that they are developed, if you click through them, they have, broad informational kind of overview and guidance, but they also have worksheets and other resources that cities can then take and use as checklists or as other kind of implementation tools for their own cities if they find it appropriate.
Thanks, Nasha. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat or the Q&A box.
Okay. If there are no other questions, we can move on to our second presentation, and we should have some time at the end if you can think of any questions or if anything comes up. So thanks. Well, good afternoon, everyone, again. Today I'll be discussing the Other Residential Toolkit. This was a REAP-funded project, and Studio 111 and DUDEC served as consultants. It was actually our first completed REAP project, so excited to be sharing this with you. It was also structured as a collaboration with students at USC Sol Price School of Public Policy, and the students led the development of a design lookbook that's included in the toolkit. So that was a really good and exciting experience working with academia, really getting young planners excited about the planning profession. Next slide, please. So in today's presentation, I'll just provide you an overview of the toolkit, get into the typologies, briefly discuss how we identified sites, go over the toolbox, as well as present a case study. Sorry, next slide, please. So what is the Other Residential Toolkit? Well, the toolkit provides a creative approach for jurisdictions looking to increase their housing supply and production by converting non-residential land that we have termed other to residential. For this toolkit, we selected 4 land use classifications, and these are gas stations, golf courses, brownfields, and retail commercial. And the toolkit was intended to be used by agencies and planners in 2 ways. The first being to spark outside of the box thinking for jurisdictions interested in the conversion of sites, but don't know where to begin in the process. And the second for jurisdictions that maybe already have a specific site in mind that falls into one of these land use classifications, or even a specific typology in mind, and the toolkit can allow them to think more creatively about how the site can be reused for housing. And why is it needed? Well, the mounting housing shortage in the SCAG region has created the need for finding innovative ways to increase housing production. SCAG does prioritize infill and redevelopment of underutilized land based on the priorities and strategies that we outline in our Connect SoCal plan. However, the built-up nature of Southern California communities is often a barrier for adding more housing, and this creates a challenge for many cities looking to achieve their regional housing needs assessment targets. And this is something that we've heard from jurisdictions. So in part, this tool is a response to that, to help jurisdictions identify sites and really rethink existing land uses in a jurisdiction and how they can be used for housing. Next slide, please. So the toolkit is comprised of a step-by-step guide that walks through the conversion of sites and includes identifying opportunities, analyzing the potential, identifying barriers, and identifying tools to overcome those barriers, and putting it all together in a conversion roadmap. We've also included a toolbox, which is a repository of various regulatory design and other types of tools that jurisdictions can employ to overcome those barriers identified. And we have, like I mentioned before, a site design lookbook that was created by students at USC, as well as some case studies from the region, which highlight success stories and really provide that sort of design inspiration and a different way to, approach or view a site that might not have initially been considered suitable for residential. Included with the toolkit is an appendix that includes a detailed research memo that goes into a deep dive of the different land use categories, challenges you may want to consider, tools to overcome them. And then we've also included a brownfields remediation memo that lays out all the considerations required when looking to convert brownfield sites, because they are obviously a bit more complicated with cleanup and remediation often required. And we've included a site inventory methodology document, which walks you through step-by-step how to use SCAG's helper tool to identify potential sites in your jurisdiction. And I'll discuss that a little bit later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So in terms of the opportunity, golf courses, gas stations, retail, commercial, and brownfields have the potential to become attractive for conversion to residential use due to market factors, the changing nature of their use, and broader policies and priorities for redevelopment in the state. So starting off with golf courses, the continuous closure of golf courses nationwide has opened up the debate of new uses for them, among which housing has been central in that debate. Since 2005, more than 1,200 golf courses across the nation have closed. So that really gives you an idea of the magnitude of the opportunity. Similarly with gas stations, according to the National Association of Convenience Stores, 25% of the nation's 200,000 gas stations have closed since 1991. And this trend is likely to continue due to the rise of electric vehicles, the emergence of ride-hailing, autonomous vehicles. And additionally, the state of California has prohibited the sale of gas-powered vehicles from 2035. So you can imagine, the demand for gas stations will probably continue decreasing in the decades to come. Another important factor, something to consider about gas stations, is that they're often located in urban neighborhoods that are close to community services, on commercial corridors and key intersections. So converting these type of sites will add infill residential development and help fill out neighborhoods and really create that 15-minute neighborhood or 15-minute city that we've been discussing now in the planning field. In terms of retail commercial, bricks and mortar retail has been struggling due to the growth of e-commerce and has only been accelerated by the pandemic, which will provide additional opportunities for conversion of these retail commercial sites to residential as well as mixed-use developments. These sites are often located adjacent to transit or highway accessible along major corridors. So from a transportation standpoint, they lend themselves quite well to residential. And proposed laws like SB 6 and AB 115 are two bills that would help and legalize housing and mixed-use development of commercial sites. And this will further facilitate the conversion of underutilized commercial lots. And then finally, we have brownfields, and brownfields often infill sites in urban core areas, so redeveloping them does provide the opportunity to further objectives of smart growth cities. They're also located in disadvantaged areas, and having that redevelopment opportunity can help with the revitalization of historically disadvantaged neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So in terms of how we went about identifying sites in the region, we use SCAG's helper tool to identify potential sites. The helper tool is an existing web-based mapping tool to help jurisdictions understand local land use. The tool is based on parcel level land use data and can be used by anyone really to identify potential sites within their jurisdictional boundaries. For our analysis for the toolkit, we started off with a large data set that comprised the entire SCAG region. And this was narrowed down to a subset of parcels using a series of queries. The first being the land use classification, which I had mentioned before: golf courses, brownfields, gas stations, and commercial retail. And then these were then filtered down based on what we considered ideal physical site conditions. So we used a minimum parcel size of 1/4 acre, a slope of less than 6%, and we made sure that none of these sites were in any environmental hazard zones. And lastly, we prioritized parcels based on equity, access, and opportunity criteria, such as proximity to high quality transit, healthcare facilities, and grocery stores. And depending on the queries you use, the number of sites may vary. You may be more specific about the site size or where they're located. So the number of sites could vary in your jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So based on our queries, close to 56,000 acres of sites in the SCAG region were identified that could be suitable for conversion. Orange County leading the way, followed by Los Angeles County. I just want to note that this number is based on current land use categories, and these parcels will still obviously need to undergo the steps such as updates to zoning regulations and implementation of a number of tools that we've highlighted in our toolbox in order for them to become shovel ready. And this is really just to demonstrate the magnitude of the opportunity. And we're not necessarily saying that all these sites should be converted to housing or will be converted to housing. So again, it's just about demonstrating what the opportunity is out there. Next slide, please. So in terms of the broad steps, here on the slide, I just outline what they are. So before you begin, or step 0, if you will, is identifying the site typology that you want to consider. And once you've done that, you move on to step 1, which involves analyzing the potential of the site. So for example, some jurisdictions may have an abundant number of underutilized retail commercial sites. Some may have a number of defunct gas stations. So you really want to choose a site typology or typologies where you get the biggest bang for your buck, so to speak. The next step in step 2 will be evaluating the barriers and challenges. And this is where you really get into the deep dive. But what are some of the barriers and challenges that you have in your jurisdiction that could be preventing the conversion of these sites residential? And then the following step, step 3, would be identifying the tools to overcome those barriers and challenges you identified in step 2. And the final step, step 4, would be create a conversion roadmap. So putting it all together, which will kind of lay out what are some of the following steps to actually begin the conversion of these sites. Next slide, please. So I will just walk you through an example, and I've chosen retail commercial because that seems to have a lot of these sites in all jurisdictions across the region. So the first step is to, once you've chosen the typology, is to ask some key questions. So for example, do you have any retail centers with low tenancy rates or high vacancies for several years? Are they vacant or underutilized retail centers located in transit adjacent areas or in specific plan areas that are focused on densification? If you do have sites that have been identified for higher density, and these are obvious candidates for conversion to residential. And is there potential for smaller commercial sites to be consolidated into a large development parcel? It's especially key if you want to have higher density multifamily housing, and a lot of commercial sites tend to be smaller, so consolidating them into a large development parcel would be an option. And are there any retail centers that are overparked or have underutilized surface lots that can be developed? We see a lot of these big box retailers such as Sears that have gone out of business, or you have one part of the mall where most of the anchors are gone. So these can be redeveloped on a phased basis. So starting off with the parts of the large retail centers that are defunct and moving on. So we recommend that the following departments participate in the process. This will obviously depend on what departments you have in your jurisdiction, but planning, community development, economic works, and public works. And some of the key outcomes of this step could be an inventory of underutilized sites, maps of specific opportunity areas, and so on. Next slide, please. So once you've done that, you move on to step 2, which is evaluating the barriers. So in our toolkit, we've highlighted several categories of barriers. Today, I'm just going to focus on 2. The first being the regulatory barriers. So the conversion of sites to residential mixed use happens more often in jurisdictions with fewer regulatory barriers or discretionary approvals for residential reuse. So you want to consider if there are any regulatory barriers in your jurisdiction that may be preventing the conversion of commercial sites to residential or mixed use. So for example, does the underlying commercial zoning for the opportunity site allow for by right residential? If multifamily residential is permitted, does it support compact development densities, such as a minimum of 30 dwelling units per acre? And are there any requirements in existing ordinances that limits the conversion of commercial sites to residential? And you also want to consider some of the barriers from the developer perspective as well. So looking at development risk, long entitlement processes and delays that lead to additional costs are a deterrent for developers. And you want to ask yourself, are there any measures in place to reduce entitlement risk for developers in the approval process? For example, are developers typically required to provide offsite improvements or implement offsite mitigation efforts? And these could be related to mobility, open space, street amenities. And do these increase the permitting times? Are there clear frameworks and guidance for development in lieu fees or development impact fees? Is there a streamlined and expedited review process in place? So these are the kind of barriers that you want to evaluate when looking at your jurisdiction and how it approaches development. Next slide, please. So we've also included a toolbox in our toolkit. And this is an example of one of the toolbox matrices. And for each tool in the toolbox, we've called out a couple of components. We've included the category of the tool, whether it's a regulatory barrier or minimizing physical challenges. We've provided an example of the tool and what kind of land use category it's applicable to. So some of these tools are only applicable to gas stations, others are universal, so applicable to all the land use categories. We've also highlighted the role the agency can play in implementing that tool. For example, is the agency a facilitator of the tool, like providing lot consolidation incentives to developers or creating a specific plan? Or is it an initiator or partner, such as creating a tailored community benefit agreement or creating an opportunity site inventory and database? Next slide. So here we have an example of a tool that falls into category 1. It's removing regulatory barriers. Examples of tools that fall in this category would be a general plan amendment, a specific plan, an area plan, or corridor plan. And we've identified the role of the agency as a facilitator. We've also identified the scale and scope of the tool. So in this case, it's a institutional change or new regulation. We've highlighted when this tool would be used and also to what kind of land use is applicable to. So in this case, it's applicable to all 4 land use categories that we discuss in the toolkit. And within each tool, we also identified a step-by-step how you either go about creating it or implementing it if you already have it in your jurisdiction. Next step, please. So in terms of the final step, this is creating a conversion roadmap. So this is where you bring it all together. And in creating the conversion roadmap, you want to do it by clustering tools together that address barriers and challenges that you had identified. And this can be through policy programs or process improvements. So for example, we have this large individual site typology. So the regulatory barriers are addressed by a zone change, a general plan update, And then design guidelines are addressed by urban design standards, and you reduce the developer risk by having streamlined or mitigating certain fees. And then in terms of addressing community engagement, you would implement community engagement plan with community benefits agreement. Next slide, please. So just in terms of a case study, we have one from West Hollywood. It's called the AVALON. This was a former retail strip mall. And before it was a sort of a defunct retail strip center that you see all over the region. And here you have the after, which was a mixed-use development with affordable senior housing in place. Some of the tools that the city of West Hollywood used to address some of the challenges was a general plan, land use amendment, zoning amendment, and a specific plan implementation. In terms of addressing challenges with community, they had a lot of community outreach and advisory board that provided recommendations, and they retained an existing legacy business, in this case, the Trader Joe's, that went back into the new development. And then in terms of generating that developer interest, they were able to secure funding for the senior affordable housing component of the project. Next slide, please. And then here's just more information on the project. So it's a 3-acre site. The zoning was community commercial 1. And the development program included a 7-story mixed use, 294 market rate units, 76 senior affordable housing, as well as 32,000 square feet of retail. And we've included a number of case study sites across the region that fall into all the land use classifications that we have in the toolkit. So definitely look at them. And there are some links there to some contact information and examples of how the jurisdictions went about implementing and creating these tools. Next slide. So thank you. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer them.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat or the Q&A.
Okay, if we have no further questions, please feel free to email me. My contact information is on this website. You can also email housing@scag.ca.gov, and I'll be happy to. How long did the West Hollywood project take? I'm not completely sure how long it took. I can look into that. We do have contacts at West Hollywood. If anyone in the webinar is from the city of West Hollywood and knows the answer to this question, that would be great. I believe I saw Allison Bartle on here not too long ago.
David, I could answer that question.
Oh, okay, perfect.
That was one of my projects while I was housing manager with West Hollywood. So it was the greater process of 10 years, but in specifically for Avalon and coming out of the ground, it was around 6 from inception through completion.
Okay, thank you, Jacob.
I think this project also represents a great public-private partnership where the city's 20% inclusionary requirement was the basis for the 77 units of affordable housing that was brought into the project. And we brought in a partner, the West Hollywood Community Housing Corporation, who partnered with Avalon to achieve that project. It ended up being a 4% LIHTC deal with the nonprofit West Hollywood Housing Corporation ultimately being the owner of the building. So it was a pretty great project on a number of different ways. And it's not just an example of an other residential, but also a great example of a successful public-private partnership.
Thank you, Jacob. So moving on, next we have an update, 2.0 update from Jacob Noonan and Jessica Suarez.
Thanks so much, David. Really appreciate it. So I'm Jacob Noonan. I'm a housing program manager with SCAG. I'm focused on standing up some new and we think very exciting housing grant opportunities within the REAP 2.0 funding. So for those not in the know about what REAP is, that's the Regional Early Action Planning Grants. The state had issued one in 2019. They have since issued an additional in 2021, and those funds are going to be available in this next early in 2023. So we wanted to, Jessica Reyes Juarez, who's one of my colleagues, and I wanted to share some information with you about a couple of the different programs that are being developed specifically for housing within that REAP 2.0 program. So we do have a couple of slides. Next slide, please. We have more slides than we're going to cover because we do want to definitely make sure that we're aware of time and that we create space for questions. However, we also wanted to create some background around the REAP program itself and then dive into two of the specific funding areas within what we are calling the PATH program. That's different than how you may be familiar with PATH, which is People Assisting the Homeless, which is a very successful homeless services program. We have identified this as the programs to accelerate transformative housing. So PATH within the REAP 2.0 program is relating to that. There are a couple of three funding strategies. We're going to cover two of them in depth and just highlight on one other, and then we'll cover briefly our evaluation criteria and then touch on the milestones and the timeline so you're aware of when these funding opportunities are going to come available if you're interested. Next slide, please. So a little bit of information around the REAP 2021 funding. This is also REAP 2.0, REAP 2021. It's one and the same. This was created in the AB 140. This was the fiscal year 2021-22 state budget revised. $600 million has been carved out of the state budget for all regions. $246 million is the amount that is coming down to the SCAG region. Again, these are grant funds, one-time grant funds. They'll be available in 2023. They do need to be encumbered by June of 24 and then fully expended by June of 26. And so these are intended for very quick, actionable items focused on achieving the goals, which we have on, I believe, the next slide, please. First of all, we wanted to cover our local SCAG REAP 2.0 framework, recognizing that we have a number of core objectives that we'd like to achieve within this state funding as well. Really, it's focused on transformative planning that's going to realize the Connect SoCal plan and tying work and efforts into that. It's, for instance, building regional capacity to deliver on our 6th cycle RENA goals. It's to promote infill within our priority growth areas and in line with the infill definition that's within the REAP 2.0 program, to demonstrate consistency with our racial equity early action plan, and also to represent best practices in vehicle miles traveled and reducing that VMT across the SCAG region. Next slide, please. This slide here it summarizes our entire REAP 2.0 program framework and also captures the essence of the state program's information. So on the left-hand side of this slide is information on the state REAP 2.0 program. On the right is our three major funding areas within our program, how we're proposing to make these grant funds available to the region. So just in quick summary, we covered $246 million is coming down to the SCAG region to be encumbered by 24, expended by 26. This is for transformative planning and implementation activities. There's three program objectives, which you'll see in our evaluation criteria later on. Accelerated infill development that facilitates housing supply choice and affordability, affirmatively furthering fair housing, reducing vehicle miles traveled. So all programs proposed, all actions proposed must meet these three objectives and address and be transformative in its planning and implementation. We do have three funding areas, as I mentioned on the right-hand side of this slide: early action initiatives, transportation partnership program, and the programs to accelerate transformative housing or PATH program. We've highlighted the PATH program in yellow, and we've highlighted two of the funding areas within PATH in yellow. These are the two funding areas we're going to focus on. We will, though, mention the HIP pilot program just briefly in our materials. Next slide, please. So within that PATH program, we've earmarked a little over almost 89 million in one-time grants that will be available within these different funding areas. We have a NOFA that we'll be releasing in the early part of 2023. This is focused on lasting affordability, and it's really centered around innovative housing finance, supporting housing trust funds and catalyst funds. We have 45 million earmarked in that category. And then we have 35 million allocated into a pilot program, the regional utilities supporting housing. And Jessica, in a moment, will get further into that program itself. And then lastly, a program that we wanted to touch on, but not spend too much time on. However, we're happy to take questions if you have them, is our second pilot program and the third funding area within PATH, which is the housing infill on public and private lands. And this is really focused on helping entities, both public and private, that have lands, that are interested in developing the lands with affordable housing, to scale up that and move those lands into development. And also looking to help agencies that have regulatory land use control to expand and increase housing and residential development within corridor-wide or area-wide areas through policies and initiatives. So we do have some money, about almost 9 million earmarked into that. Next slide, please. Just a little bit more information on this HIP pilot program, and then we're going to jump into the NOFA and into the RUSH pilot program. It's, again, really focused on entities that have land. So if you're part of a city that has redevelopment era lands, we'd be very interested in speaking with you, discussing, hearing from you how this program might help you if you're interested in achieving affordable housing on those lands, or if you're interested in exploring taking your capacity within quarter-wide and area-wide zones further for mixed use and residential development. We'd be interested in discussing that with you. We're intending within this pilot program to develop a bench of consultants and to provide the technical assistance and the support for feasibility, visioning, pre-development, perhaps on sites, to really build up a good pipeline of additional lands and availability for residential development. Next slide, please. So the first of the two programs we really wanted to share with you and answer any questions that you have is focused on a notice of funding availability. This is for lasting affordability. As I mentioned, this would have 45 million in it. I should note that based on interest in our programs, we do have the capacity to shift money around. So this is an initial earmark of 45 million. It's focused on supporting existing and establishing new housing trusts, catalyst funds, land trusts. It's focused on creating new and innovative finance products. Funding can be used for pre-development, for bridge, for gap financing within this context of transformationality and how that would manifest itself within the local area and zone and intended purposes. It can be used for land acquisition and banking as well, as long as that land would be available for development within 5 years of the expenditure date. So by June 30th of 2031. The entities that are eligible, this includes any entity that manages a housing trust, a land trust, catalyst funds. So, cities and counties, private entities, joint power authorities, and then entities with a mission-driven focus on increasing affordability. So there's a pretty wide range of eligibility within this NOFA. I'm going to pause there, and I believe that the next slide takes us into the RUSH pilot program. But again, hopefully we'll have some time to answer any questions that you have around this, and we will also be providing our contact info at the end. We'd love to have further conversations with you offline if that would make some sense and if you're interested. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Jessica Reyes-Juarez, who will and advance us to the next slide, please, who will take us through RUSH.
Great, thank you, Jacob. Yeah, so for our second pilot program, Regional Utility Supporting Housing, RUSH, we're really looking to support the basic infrastructure that directly supports entitling and delivering housing. So we're thinking water, wastewater, stormwater management, electric. And we anticipate the eligible applicants for this program to be public agencies, utility districts, tribal entities, but we could also even see developers of large land areas if we're thinking a more district-wide or development-wide approach to streamlining and having an efficient utility process. So we are in the process of developing this program further, but we will have an industry forum early next year that will help inform the program and the outcomes of it. And we're really going to be seeking input on the regional infrastructure planning, utility infrastructure projects, and large scale development utility planning. And we have a couple more slides to kind of talk a little bit more about our framework here. Next slide. Yeah, so when we're thinking of the exploration process around, how we want to approach the pilot program and approach SCAG's involvement in really connecting the utilities with housing development, we are convening a utilities industry forum early next year, and we hope to convene experts, really those that are involved in making decisions around utilities, and national and local experts as well. And we're kind of structuring it around a ULI technical assistance panel. If you've ever attended or been participated in one of those, ULI is one of our partners on conducting this event. So it'll conclude with a single day forum where we'll really hope to get some crowdsourcing of ideas that we can hopefully launch through the pilot project. So after the request for information will follow the industry forum, and then hopefully after that is when we intend to fund some of these projects. And like I mentioned, this utilities is non-transportation utilities, really looking at supporting housing development, and we'll move on to the next slide. And why are we investing in utilities this time around with RAPE? Well, we know that there is a lack of accurate and up-to-date availability of location, capacity for electric, stormwater, sewer, and water. And we also know that this is a basic requirement to deliver housing, could be a barrier to development, and could also really drive up the cost of housing. So especially if those costs or those upgrades are happening on a project by project level, we know that that's more money and could be very costly versus on a system-wide or more coordinated level. So we're looking to fund innovative ideas that can help streamline this, that can help us work in a more coordinated and regional effort, and that could even help at the city level, help them understand what their capacity around utilities. And with that, I will pass it back to Jacob to kind of wrap it up.
So I've placed my email contact.
Oh,
chat.
Sorry, I forgot we had some evaluation criteria here. But I'll just really quickly run through these very quick. And Mirani, you can leave it on this slide, and then we can skip to the end after I'm done with the slide. But for the PATH program, once we do release our call for applications, we will be evaluating all the projects based on this evaluation criteria. So it's really going to help shape the kind of projects we hope to prioritize, projects that will achieve all of those program objectives coming out of RAPE, that will include outreach, especially to disadvantaged communities, that have some momentum, some partnerships or policies in place that will really support the program. And again, that could be either policies or financial matches that will prioritize disadvantaged communities, either be located in that area or be in a high resource area and advance affordable housing in high resource areas, and really contribute to our regional housing infrastructure policies, neighborhoods, mobility programs. And the PATH program will also consider how we're dispersing all of these funds that Jacob mentioned across the SCAG region, which is similar to the SCAMP region. So we're really thinking of evaluating projects and applications that are within similar geographies as well. So we can skip ahead to the schedule there. And you can go to the next one. So when we're thinking of when we're hoping to release these applications, SCAG is on the back end working on our application to HCD, which is due December 31st. So if all goes according to plan, we will hope to have approval of our application from HCD, and that means we can then start releasing the calls early next year. So we'll start off with the NOFA first, and then it would be followed by that second pilot program. Jacob mentioned HIP, and like I mentioned for the RUSH pilot program, we would be opening that call after we conclude the industry forum early next year. And okay, I'll pass it back to Jacob now.
Thanks so much, Jessica. So next slide, please. I believe that this is our last slide. So I have dropped my email contact in the chat, and I've just now also dropped a link to our website where you can find all the information that will be available on the REAP 2021 programs. That includes the PATH program, the early action initiatives, and the County Transportation Commission programs. So please have a look there, save that, bookmark that tab. We are going to be releasing our calls on this tab. We also have our guidelines. Any other updates or information will be provided there at the web address. It's scag.ca.gov/REAP 2021. We will be continuing ongoing region-wide and inclusive engagement for the programs. We're developing what that looks like now. Certainly as these programs kick off and through the 2 years that we'll be running them, we want to be able to share out information, success, process, and receive feedback so that we have a continuous loop feed informing how the programs are designed and how they evolve and how we conclude this program so that we can best support folks in the field that are really working to create change around housing. We are available right now, and we are happy and we'd be thrilled to discuss potential projects, proposals that you might have. My email is here at the bottom of the page as well as in the chat, as well as Jessica has also placed her contact info on this slide. I believe that the slides will be available to you after this webinar. So please reach out. We'd love to chat with you about your thoughts and how that could best fit within these funding strategies. Further, we are planning at least 2 different funding application information sessions coming up in 2023, most likely towards the end of January, but those dates are still to be determined and set. It's really going to depend on when we receive our approval from the state for our full funding application. So bookmark that website that's in the chat and check back for regular updates. Also, I believe that there's a way that you can sign up to receive email blasts from us. We'll certainly be announcing any information and information sessions and opening the calls through email. Next slide, please. So with that, again, I really thank you for your time, and we look forward to hearing from you.
So much, Jacob and Jessica. We do have time for one question. Jacob, this is related to encouraging tribal entities to apply for the RUSH program. Perhaps if you could speak a little bit to our outreach that's focused on tribal entities, that would be great.
And this is the question is, given the unfortunate lack of success in HCD attracting applications from tribal entities, including in the multifamily supernova and the LHTF program, is there a plan to encourage tribal entities to apply for the RUSH program? So we have been working on, we've been doing a fair amount of engagement and direct contact one-on-one meetings with tribes, both, with directly to the 16 tribes and also within TASIN, one of the tribal entities. So we're aware, we have been hearing of the challenges, the struggles. When you look at the definition of infill I think this is important. When you look at the definition of infill that's within the PATH program, that's within the REAP 2021 program that the state has developed, it may look similar to other descriptions definition of infill, but it is not. The state has created some flexibility within that definition so that we are able to capture infill that would be within the entire area of SCAG. SCAG staff have been working with different areas, communities that are affected and impacted and concerned about infill on a definition that we can share with the state for concurrence that we can use so that we ensure that folks could qualify for these funds. In addition, and specifically to tribes, I think it's important to note that the state has carved out $30 million in rural funds, and within that there's a $7 million set aside directly for tribes, and that HCD has some technical assistance and support that will help tribes apply for those funding programs. And we are rolling all of that out to tribes so that folks are aware. I think we know and recognize that one of the biggest challenges is just simply knowing and understanding what the programs are, what the availability is, and what the dates are to submit.
So we have two more questions that came in. So if you could just answer these quickly, that would be great. Yep. What is considered a large parcel of land? And this is related to the RUSH program.
I wonder if Jessica wants to field that.
Yeah, so we don't have the actual parameters of what we mean by that. This is just some preliminary thoughts that we hope to explore in the industry forum. But the idea there is that the REAP funding is really going for a transformative project. So we're not looking to provide like a single point of connection to a parcel when we're thinking of utilities, or thinking more at like the district-wide level. So that's why we were saying a larger development within the city, not just citywide, could be considered for the funds as well. And then the next question, I'll ping it back to Jacob, is that if these will be grants, could they also go towards revolving loans? If you want to, yeah.
Of course, yes. The NOFA will be in the form of a grant. We are still working out with HCD what the underwriting expectations are and what the long-term commitments are within that grant structure, but the structure itself will be a grant.
Thank you, Jacob. If anyone has any more questions, please feel free to email either Jessica or Jacob. They popped their email addresses in the chat, so thank you. Moving on to our announcements. Next slide, please, Marwan. So we have a couple of announcements. So our next housing working group is going to be on January 17th, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. So please go ahead and register for that. And also SCAG still has our grant application for technical assistance, and this is open to all jurisdictions and all tribal governments. If you'd like more information, you can email housing@scag.ca.gov. And the SCAG's REAP 2.0 call for applications will be released in early 2023. So those are all our announcements. And then you can register for SCAG's newsletter. There'll be a link in this PowerPoint presentation so you can be informed in all our latest developments. So with that, thank you so much, everyone, and I appreciate your attending.